Today I'll be talking about the process of photosynthesis in which plants, producers, create their own food using a chemical reaction. As indicated by the equation, we can see two main reactants, carbon dioxide and water to create glucose and oxygen. However, in this reaction we see two steps. You ask, which are they? The light independent and the light dependent. We first begin with the light dependent reaction. We begin our journey with pigments. What is a pigment? A pigment is a coloring of matter that is used to reflect or absorb a certain wavelength of light. As a result, each pigment is a separate color since it absorbs a different coloring of light. The main pigment that plants use is called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is located in the cells of plants, to be more accurate, in the chloroplasts, which are sacs that are just used to hold chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a green pigment which absorbs a certain wavelength of light, giving it its green color. So my first claim is, chlorophyll is the pigment used to absorb light in plants. Well, how was chlorophyll proved in the first place? Well, it started with a scientist known as Campardi, who, through an observation, discovered chloroplasts in the tissues of plants. Later, in 1818, two scientists, after multiple discoveries in plants, were finally observed the green pigment as a chlorophyll. However, it was due to a contribution of many scientists at the time. The evidence we done in class is through the measure of starch. But by doing that, we had to extract the pigment in the chlorophyll by using a solvent. We can see a green coloring in the water as it mixed with it, proving that chlorophyll was there. Have more than one pigment. Plants, while the most dominant pigment in this case is chlorophyll, plants do have more pigment, and we can extract this through a process known as chromatography, and we did this in class. They do have other pigments such as xanthophyll or carotene, which do the same job but absorb a different wavelength of light. Now that we've introduced how the pigments absorb the light energy, we must answer the question is, what is this light used for? Well, the claim here is that light is used to break the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. This was proved over the years by 3 different processes and multiple scientists. The first thing that was proposed was by a physician known as Julius von Meyer. He was the first to propose that light energy was the beginning of all energy on planet Earth. And in his book, he had proposed this with the law of energy, that energy can never be created or destroyed. Another scientist that was vital toward our understanding was Cornelius bernardus von Neal. Forgive me for my pronunciation. He proposed that the light energy was used to break the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. He proposed this through an understanding of bacteria and how that worked, which is a different equation, but also used photosynthesis. However, it was quite controversial to earlier beliefs and can only be proved in the future, today, where we could change the isotopes in the water molecule to see which one would actually be let out through the stomata. And I'll get to why this is important since it comes up in another claim, which is that the oxygen that is released through the stomata comes from the water molecule and not the carbon dioxide molecule. The claim here is that stomata is the way that carbon dioxide entered the plant. So who really discovered stomata? Well, stomata is more like a mouth that's in the plant cells that is used to take in carbon dioxide, release oxygen, and release water vapor. Our first scientist was Robert Hooke, who created the light microscope, and through studying plants and animal cells, he was able to further our understanding of photosynthesis, but never really notice stomata. It came down to other scientists after him, such as Piggy, who first noticed it, and later scientists also noticed it but didn't know what its function was. Its name came from the Greek word for mouth, stoma, and our today's full form, stomata. Well, we first must answer is, how did we know that carbon dioxide played a crucial role in the process of photosynthesis? It mainly came down to 2 different scientists, one who was called Joseph Priestley and another known as Cinnabar.
It started off with Joseph Priestley and his experiment of how could an animal survive with a plant in a container. By using a mouse and putting it in a container filled with used air, he could see that it died because every living thing needs oxygen to survive. But after, in a separate container, he put a plant in there with the used air. By putting in a mouse in there, he actually saw that it lived for some time, but later took it out and put it in the container with only used air, where it died. In short summary, his experiment proved that plants would use the carbon dioxide, or used air as he called it, and repurpose it with oxygen. Therefore, an animal could survive in there. And this was crucial to our understanding of what carbon dioxide did play a role in photosynthesis, and that plants could actually help to sustain life. The next scientist that greatly was important to our discovery was Jean Cinnabar, who actually was able to finally confirm that plants took in carbon dioxide and released oxygen. This was an experiment that he used in water where if there was no carbon dioxide in the water, as a result the plant never released oxygen, which could finally finalize our thoughts on the use of carbon dioxide in photosynthesis, proving that that carbon dioxide is a vital reactant in the chemical reaction known as photosynthesis. However, we still now, what ends up happening next is that the carbon dioxide enters the stomata. But we still need to answer the question is what is the function of stomata and how does it work? Well, stomata is, well, as I said, it's kind of a mouth in the plant's leaves. It's made of two guard cells which will open up depending on the light intensity outside. Usually they'll only open up in the night since it also, while carbon dioxide does enter in, it also lets go of oxygen and water vapor. And since they don't want to lose too much water, they only open it up during the night where there is still some energy to break the water molecules into gas. From there, carbon dioxide will enter and go to the leaves where photosynthesis then takes place, creating glucose.
Step that ends up happening is the creation of glucose. Now that the plant has transported the water from the roots to the leaves to the tissue known as xylem and then broken apart with the oxygen being left as that leads to the stomata, what we're left with are the two main reactants, carbon dioxide and the hydrogen. They form to create glucose. Now at this point in time, glucose cannot stay this way because for two reasons. First of all, it's not something that a plant can use because it doesn't eat it. It has to be used, turned into energy, or turned into starch. The reason it must be turned into starch is due to since the glucose is actually soluble with the water that's in the cell, and that can mess the cell's mixture of water. By turning into starch, it can also be stored since it's a carbohydrate and can be stored to be turned into energy later. But the next step is where the mitochondria come in, which is considered the power of the cell. So the next claim is that using cellular respiration, the glucose is then converted into ATP energy and carbon dioxide and water. However, while glucose has been created, which is the plant's food since they are producers, it's not been moved into energy. And this is where things get a bit confusing. So, another chemical reaction happens in the mitochondria, which is considered the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria does a process known as cellular respiration, which, through a chemical reaction of glucose and oxygen, it produces carbon dioxide, water, and ATP energy, which is the energy molecules that both us and plants use as energy for our daily things. So where does it get this oxygen? Well, some might believe that it's the oxygen that comes from the equation. This is actually oxygen that the stomata have taken in. Since cellular respiration is actually the opposite of photosynthesis. Instead of carbon dioxide and hydrogen coming from the water molecule creating glucose and oxygen, now the glucose and oxygen are creating carbon dioxide, water, and energy. But the oxygen comes from the stomata. Plants both release oxygen and take in oxygen, and they release carbon dioxide and take in carbon dioxide, which gets a bit confusing. But and this proved that plants actually do respire, and making that every living thing needs oxygen to survive. So plants take in oxygen, and through a chemical reaction with glucose, they create ATP energy, which it uses for to power the plant. It creates water, which is released as water vapor through the stomata, and it, carbon dioxide, which is also released. Well, this evidence for this cellular respiration cannot be really attained to only one scientist, but it can be seen through an experiment. Many times, students, even in labs, will using O2 monitors and carbon dioxide monitors will see differences as the different processes happen. Since they happen at very fast rates, in the beginning you can see a decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide levels, and then see an increase in the oxygen. But in cellular respiration, you can see an increase in the carbon dioxide, but there will be a decrease in the oxygen. Now, what ends up needing to happen is that the stomata needs to get rid of the waste. We got water that came from cellular respiration, but we now need to get rid of oxygen. But how did we know that this oxygen came from the water molecule, as I said earlier? Well, scientists changed the isotopes. During an experiment done, they put oxygen 16, the normal one, in water and made carbon dioxide's oxygen 18. What came out through the stomata was oxygen 16. Next time they did the inverse. They put oxygen 18 to the water molecule and oxygen 16 to the carbon dioxide molecule. But this time oxygen 18 came out through the stomata. This proved that the oxygen waste is coming from the water molecule, and we were able to prove that the water molecule is the one that was actually being broken apart. It proved two theories at the same time. Not only does photosynthesis happen, but there's many times factors that affect photosynthesis. This is one scientist found him. His name is John Ingenhouse. He theorized that the rate of photosynthesis would increase and eventually plateau as light intensity increased. We know this because we can just do basic experiments in schools. By increasing light intensity, we can see an increase of oxygen if we were to use plants that are in the water, since their oxygen bubbles will appear. And if we measure it over time and slowly increase the light level, we'll see it happening at faster, therefore proving it was going at a faster rate. This graph shows one experiment done in this table, and we can see that the way John Ingenhouse theorized it, it came out to be about the same way, where it eventually plateaued, proving that light intensity can speed up the rate of photosynthesis. Well, now I finally need to talk about the flow of matter and the input and output of energy. Plants already play an important part in the flow of matter, especially since they create their own food. By taking carbon dioxide, which is already recycled matter, since the conservation of matter states that matter cannot be created or destroyed, carbon dioxide is already recycled matter, and since it's a part of the carbon cycle, it's already using matter that's been recycled over and over and over again. And then using this with water, which comes from the water cycle, it's creating glucose, its own food, which is just showing how it's recycling matter and showing the flow of matter in photosynthesis. And it's outputting its waste, which is carbon dioxide and oxygen. Also, it's using the input and output of energy. Since Julius Robert Mayer stated that light energy is the beginning of all energy on planet Earth, by inputting light energy, it's creating its own energy, which is the output. This is its food, glucose, which is then converted into starch, or ATP energy. This plays a really important role in photosynthesis that makes it so interesting and so beneficial for the ecosystem it is in.